lives. Everyone.
E il male non prevarrà.
Evil will not
Siamo
prevail.
tutti nelle mani di
We are all
Dio.
in the hands of God.
This was the president's deal. He's the closer. He gets deals done that we could never get done because he understands business, he understands deals.
I'm very disappointed in that, but I have so many different things that I'm doing now with the trade. You know, I'm one person, I can only make, boom, I can only lift that little phone so many times in a day.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett. Happy to be back in Washington. My thanks to my colleagues who filled in for me while I was away. Tonight on America Decides. Listen up. One of the biggest religious and immigration stories of the late 19th and early 20th century America was the arrival of European Catholics. They settled and worked in big cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and yes, Chicago. Probably coincidentally, America found itself first an emerging, then obvious superpower at the same time. So much so that the idea of an American pope was not serious, too hazardous, it was thought, to attach the global church to a first emerging, then realized global industrial and political power. Until this afternoon, that assumption was thought to still hold true. Until, for the first time in the history of the Catholic Church, it was not. To the thunderstruck surprise of experienced, I mean really experienced Vatican watchers and the tens of thousands joyously arrayed around St. Peter's, the name Robert Francis Prevost was spoken, an American from Chicago, a graduate of Villanova, just north of Philadelphia, was the new pope. Pope Leo XIV, he shall be. An American successor to Pope Francis. Pope Leo XIV spoke of universal love, bridge building, peace, and service. In the past, Cardinal Prevost had expressed some sympathy with critics of Vice President J.D. Vance's theological argument that there are hierarchies of love, that outsiders or non-citizens naturally receive less of that love than, say, for example, a family member, close friend, or a citizen. Whether Pope Leo XIV's election was meant as an American counterweight within the Vatican to Vance's theological construct or global hostility to immigrants in general, only the elected cardinals know the answer to that. But the first American pope will doubtless, for a time, electrify Catholics here and likely the Americas, with consequences theological and possibly political to come. So we begin tonight with columnist for the National Catholic Reporter, Michael Sean Winters. Michael, let's just ask you, how surprised are you? What do you think the prospects of Pope Leo XIV are for the Church, for America, for Catholicism?
I was not hugely surprised. I had prepared 3 analyses for the white smoke, and he was one of the 3. And so I had that up in about 15 minutes, posted at the National Catholic Reporter. I think it's important to remember the Cardinals didn't view him as an American candidate. It was very interesting when he came out onto the balcony. He began in Italian, obviously. He's been elected the Bishop of Rome. But then he switched to Spanish, not to English. And this is a man who spent 2/3 of his career outside of the United States, most of it in Peru, and not just in Peru, but in very impoverished rural areas of Peru. And he was very successful in his ministry there, in recruiting native vocations and in schooling them to take over the leadership positions in that area. And then he came to Rome, first to be the head of the Augustinian order, which is a worldwide order. And so he had to travel to the 50 countries where they have houses. Then he was back in Peru as a bishop, and then came back to Rome 2 years ago for a really tough job, a desk job, you know, but a job that you can't fake. There are jobs in the Vatican you can fake. Prefect of the Congregation for Bishops is not one of them. And he developed a reputation for somebody who was very effective, not afraid to make difficult decisions, but always with this heart for the poor that we saw in Pope Francis. And I think that will be his message. And for the United States, with our, consumer culture, and especially with the, kind of lifestyle of the incumbent of the White House, I can't think of anything more countercultural than a man who's taken a vow of poverty and lived it all of his adult life.
Michael, how were you able to see what others didn't really see? The chances that this particular American and Pan-American cardinal would be a top contender, and how much or how meaningful is it for the Church and its future that this does seem to be an endorsement of continuity with Francis's approach to the papacy?
So, you know, it's funny, the American cardinals I spoke with, you know, before Pope Francis died, at the last conclave, they always said, you know, the American passport, it's just a deal breaker. But I wasn't hearing that from the Spanish cardinals or the Latin American cardinals, or critically, the Vatican cardinals. They were like, we don't care. We like the guy. We're not electing the country. We're electing the man. And so I had a sense that his combination of managerial skills and a kind of understated charisma, and as you just touched on, they wanted to send the message that we want a pope who is going to be in continuity with Francis, both in terms of his welcoming that the new pope spoke to, but also with a commitment to the poor and to a real sense that, you know, solidarity, the politics of the church is different from secular politics. You always have a winner and a loser in secular politics. The church's teaching on solidarity says, you know, everyone should be a winner in this, but with a special preferential option for the poor, the marginalized. We always, you know, have a heart for the people who are the uns, the undocumented, the unemployed, the unborn, those who are defined by society by what they lack. Those are the people that have a special place in the heart of the church.
And Michael, very quickly, what might you say to those enthusiasts who were there, who were shouting USA, USA?
I just, you know, obviously, you know, we were a missionary church 200 years ago, so this is a real kind of sense of becoming moment. But I just want to push back against the idea he's an American pope. He has a passport. He was born in Chicago and all that. But the pope belongs to the whole world. And I think, you know, he showed that again by going into Spanish, not English, from the loggia this afternoon.
Incredibly valuable perspective. Michael Sean Winters, thank you so very much. I want to bring in CBS News papal contributor Candida Moss. Candida, how was your day? How did it play out for you? Give us your reaction.
Well, it was a profoundly emotional moment, and it was also quite a shocking one. I don't think anyone really anticipated an American pope, and then an American pope who would come out and speak in Spanish. So this was a profoundly moving day for everyone who was there, and we now have, as Michael Sean Winters was saying, we have a pope who is really a pope of the whole world. He's a Peruvian citizen as well. He has traveled widely. He has held offices at the Vatican. He has been a bishop in Peru. He has been a pastor, a missionary, and he has a doctorate in canon law. So he really encompasses everything that the global church has to offer.
And Candida, there are two issues confronting the Vatican. One that seems more contemporary, meaning right in front of it, some financial issues, and one that has been part of the conversation globally, but certainly here in America for the past decade, if not longer, the sex abuse scandal. Do we have any insight at all into how Pope Leo XIV might approach one or the other or both?
Well, Pope Leo has a history in administration, and he actually majored in maths. So we might think that he's going to approach these financial issues with a level head. At the same time, there have been some accusations that he mishandled an investigation into a case in Peru, and that when he was in Chicago, he failed to notify a Catholic school about a predatory priest who lived nearby. Now, I will say he has vocal defenders, but I'm sure that survivors groups will be concerned looking at this. But we all hope that he will continue Pope Francis's legacy and perhaps, given his background in canon law, really cement into church law a lack of tolerance for those who are silent.
And there is a question of continuity, but also for conservative Catholics in America, they were hoping for a pope who would be more clear, offer more clarity on doctrine and the history of the church. How do you think Pope Leo XIV may or may not satisfy that particular perspective or desire?
Well, Pope Leo XIV is a centrist. He's a moderate. He shares Pope Francis's interest in social justice, the poor, and the environment. But he has been more traditional on issues like the family, LGBT inclusion. Now, those statements were made during Pope Benedict XVI's reign, so it remains to be seen how he will move ahead. But he does seem like more of a moderate candidate who will satisfy aspects of the left and the right and frustrate both groups as well.
We could not have gotten off to a better start than that. Candida Moss and our other guest, Michael Sean Winters. Thank you both so very much. Candida, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Finn Gomez joins me here at the desk. Willie James Inman on the north lawn of the White House. Finn, let me start with you. Sure. Do you consider this event of this afternoon, Pope Leo XIV, in any way a political event in America?
I think so, and I think you can characterize it that way. Look, as you stated, we don't know what happens behind closed doors in the conclave, obviously, but if you wanted to contrast the biggest American voice, you can do that. That's emanating from the White House. You can do that with naming the first American pope, right? There have been 266 popes, now 267, and this is the first American pope.
Meaning if it had been someone who was a Francis successor, meaning the same continuity, but from Africa or from South America, it might have played differently and been regarded differently within the confines of the Trump White House.
Exactly. I think the impact is larger on some of the main issues that are emanating from the White House that his predecessor, Pope Francis, also contrasted against: immigration. Big, huge issue. We saw that. We saw that in tweets and posts from Pope Leo XIV when he was a cardinal. You know, that were contrasting against some against
not
some
original ones, but retweets.
Retweets against like some of the comments made by J.D. Vance, and in particular that theological concept that you were talking about, ordo amoris, or order of love. Like essentially, how do you rank your order of love, starting with like those closest to you first, and then externally, and essentially, conceptually, it goes against some of what the St. Augustine order believes in, which is where he comes from. So this contrast, and really in particular to immigration. Therefore, when you have these large contrasting messages, one emanating from the White House on immigration, and then now one from the Vatican, I think it does change the tenor on a global stage.
And both the vice president and the president, very enthusiastic social media posts, welcoming, celebrating, etc. Yeah. Willie James Inman on the North Lawn of the White House today was also a conversation in which the White House could be at least nominally specific about a deal and trade. Let us know what happened.
Yeah, that's right, Major. The United States announcing this deal with the United Kingdom, a trade deal that the president says is comprehensive, essentially removing some of the tariffs in part from those auto tariffs. Of course, the rate set at 25%, giving the Brits a discount, so to speak. Peter Navarro described it that way earlier today, saying that those tariffs will still remain at 10% for those autos exported from the United Kingdom to here in the United States. It'll go up to 25% after 100,000 vehicles. But also on top of that, you have U.S. meat producers able to sell their goods and vice versa for the United Kingdom to do just that here in the United States as well. And ethanol producers will be able to have a better rate in terms of a 0% tariff rate if this deal is finalized. The White House pointed out that is not essentially done just yet. They're still working out the final details, especially those details when it comes to steel and aluminum. Some of those tariffs could be eliminated, or there could be some type of workaround to reduce the tariff load for the United Kingdom, but also still protecting the industry here in the United States. But this is the first major trade deal the president has announced since those reciprocal tariffs and that tariff tit for tat between the United States and China. We, of course, know that those negotiations will start at a high level this weekend in Switzerland between the U.S. and Chinese delegation, when you have the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent traveling to Switzerland, and you also have Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, traveling there as well to speak with their Chinese counterparts.
And Willie, the White House has described nations with whom we run a trade deficit as being somewhat notorious. We run, if I looked at the last numbers, a $20 billion trade surplus with the United Kingdom, meaning we're on the upside of that. So it doesn't strike me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this was a really hard thing to work out. Yes, some details, but there are far, far more difficult, more cumbersome negotiations ahead. True?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Remember, the UK is an ally of the United States, and you described it perfectly. This was kind of easy, so to speak. You had the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, visiting the White House several weeks ago and kind of sweetened the pot a little bit with a unprecedented second state visit, announcing that King Charles had invited President Trump to the United Kingdom for that state visit. So perhaps sweetening the pot a little bit, warming the relationship, even when the Prime Minister was on the phone during that Oval Office meeting earlier today. He called the president out by his first name, Donald. And so it was just very interesting to see these two men and these two countries work together in this instance. Of course, British leaders, American leaders have tried for years to come up with some type of trade agreement between the United States and the UK. Remember, the UK has left the European Union. That happened several years ago. So this deal coming to fruition is one that the United Kingdom is celebrating, the U.S. is celebrating, but certainly easier in terms of the logistics when you compare it to a situation between the U.S. and China, for instance.
And Finn, on that point, the White House has felt, I would say, increased pressure to at least put something on the table. They would prefer to put something that is absolutely signed, sealed, and delivered on the table, but they rushed it. I don't want to say rushed, but they pushed this one out even before they have everything agreed to, just to say to the markets and to the skeptics, no, we can get some progress.
Proof.
Yeah.
To show the results of what they've been
proof in the figgy pudding, the Brits might say.
Wow, nice reference, Major Garrett. Yes, done. No response.
No response. For the first time in the history of this program, we have silenced Finn Gomez. Willie James Inman, you want to jump in on this at all? You want to go around one more time?
I'll let you guys have the pudding. I'll just stick to talking about the politics here from the North Line. But look, in all seriousness, this is one of those situations that the White House is looking to celebrate. As you were talking about there, this is something that they can point to and say, look, this is what the president is doing. He's coming about with these deals. Peter Navarro, who has been working the airwaves, they were talking with reporters. He essentially said, trust in Trump, almost like God, in God we trust. I mean, they're essentially saying that Trump, at the end of the day, the president will come up with these deals, that the American people can depend on him to announce these landmark agreements between the U.S. and other countries. But with this deal today, the details not finalized. We'll, of course, wait and see what the White House comes up with when they work on those details. But still, nonetheless, something that they can point to as a success.
And very quickly, Willie James, because you mentioned China and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. On CNBC this afternoon, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, said the whole goal of those is to de-escalate, to bring down the tariffs, which are essentially creating an embargo between the two countries. So it is now the verbiage of the White House to de-escalate a trade war with China that it initiated. And I think the market's going to look very closely to see how rapidly they move in that direction and what the underlying details of that may be.
Yeah, that's certainly right. They're really being mum around here in terms of what will be worked out, what will be the specifics. Weijia Jiang, our colleague, was in the Oval just hours ago asking the president, is this going to be a substantive conversation? And he essentially said, yes. You know, we're not going to talk about just having another meeting. Remember, as you pointed out perfectly, the U.S. shot the first shot in this trade war with the Chinese. But the White House maintains that we've been treated unfairly for decades. So it's still anyone's guess as to what will happen this weekend. We'll certainly be watching closely. But for Americans, they're in the middle of this, facing those increased prices. Some Chinese retailers and websites have already raised their prices on Americans, certainly something that we'll continue to watch. But still, nonetheless, that 145% tariff rate is not nothing, right? At the end of the day, consumers could be facing those rising prices, and businesses, small businesses in particular, could be the casualty of this trade war between the U.S. and China.
Willie James Inman shrewdly sidestepping all references to figgy pudding, and Finn Gomez silenced by them for the first time ever on this program. Thanks to you both. Tensions between India and Pakistan have long simmered. That is a fact. And they are now rising, possibly in a dangerously escalatory way. What we're learning from India's ambassador to the United States, that's coming up next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As we mentioned before we went to break, tensions are rising in South Asia. 2 weeks after India accused Pakistan of launching a deadly terror attack in Indian-administered Kashmir, India says it fired missiles into terror camps into Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. They're not the same thing, and to put it mildly, they're parts of points of friction between the two countries. And overnight, these two nuclear-armed neighbors exchanged gunfire. Our Chanel Call spoke with the Indian ambassador to the United States for more perspective, and here's part of that conversation.
So, Ambassador, let's talk about what happened in the last 24 hours, because yesterday you said the Indian government is seeking de-escalation. Then, of course, overnight, Pakistan launched their own attack on India, and then India fired right back. So is de-escalation still on the table, or is India now at war with Pakistan?
Sure. So what happened was, after we launched our attacks on these terrorist facilities in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir day before yesterday, at that time itself, we had made it very clear publicly, as also to our interlocutors in the US and the world over to our partners, that there was terrorist attack on India on 22nd April where innocent civilians were killed. We have carried out a response to that. That was the original escalation, original trigger. We have carried out our response to that day before yesterday. And we were clear that insofar as our response to terrorism is concerned, that part was closed at that time. Until, of course, we did say that if Pakistan chooses to carry out any further escalation into our territory in support of terrorists, I think yesterday what Pakistan did actually conveys a very clear signal to all of us and to the rest of the world that they actually stand with the terrorist, not with the rest of the civilized world. So when they did yesterday a small action to engage our military, we carried out a proportionate response to that. I'll repeat that, proportionate and measured response. That's what it was day before yesterday to the terror attacks, where we very deliberately and consciously excluded the military facilities, excluded the economic infrastructure, excluded the social infrastructure. We were very, very careful about that. We were very measured and responsible about what we did day before yesterday. But yesterday, when Pakistan and terrorists tried to engage our military facilities, we carried out, again, a proportionate response to that yesterday. So we have always, we didn't start this. It was started by the terrorists on 22nd April. We did respond to those terrorists, excluding military, economic, social infrastructure. Pakistan tried to engage some of our military facilities yesterday, and we carried out a proportionate response yesterday.
But at what point does the escalation back and forth become a war?
I think you have to ask those who carried out the original escalation. From our side, I have repeatedly mentioned, just now, that when we carried out our action day before yesterday, there was that degree of finality to our action to the extent it was aimed at the terrorist. But then if Pakistan decided to escalate yesterday along with those terrorists, then naturally we had to respond. Day before yesterday, we exercised our right to respond. And that was, as I said, final. But if Pakistan chooses not to see that as a finality, then that's a question I think you need to direct to them.
So then let me ask this, Ambassador. What is India's objective here?
Our objective is basically to neutralize the terrorist and convey a very clear message to Pakistan. And I think the rest of the world is also conveying that to Pakistan. This morning, we understand from a readout of Secretary Rubio's call with the Pakistani Prime Minister that they have also conveyed. They have called upon Pakistan to stop their support to the terrorist attacks from their soil. So I think our objective is very clear. Our objective is to hold terrorists accountable and bring justice to the victims. Our action day before yesterday was about bringing accountability to the terrorist and bringing justice to the victim. That's what it was about, and that's what is our objective.
So, Ambassador, if the objective is to target the terrorist camps, the terrorist sites, are there more of these sites that India is aware of? Are more attacks imminent?
Yeah. Look, I will not be able to speak to the operational details about what else is available with us and what exactly might happen in days and weeks ahead. But I will repeat, and maybe I'll add a point of amplification for you. Everybody seems to have a frame of reference in which escalation is a predominant aspect. People keep saying that Pakistan is denying that they ever were behind these. Look, Pakistan has a long history of supporting terrorism. Not just cross-border terrorism that is aimed at India, but also, frankly, terror at other destinations across the world.
Chanel Call joins me now. Chanel, so good to have you with us. Great work on this. It's a super important story. From your engagement with the ambassador, your reporting, any signs of an off-ramp here?
Well, you know, Major, it does appear as though there is a lot of international attention on this. And we've heard from President Donald Trump. The White House is watching this closely, and they would like to see some de-escalation here. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been speaking with folks on both sides of this in India and in Pakistan. Today, we know he spoke to Pakistan's prime minister, but it appears as though the U.S. is sort of towing a line here. They're asking both sides to find a way to create a peaceful resolution. But at this point, Major, it doesn't appear either side are backing down.
Every administration I've covered worried about these two countries and escalation. So I know it's a big story. You can't get to all of it, but briefly help our audience understand the complicated history between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, it is a long and complicated history, Major. It all started in 1947. That's when British rule ended in India, and then this partition happened where India and Pakistan became two different countries. India, majority Hindu, and Pakistan, majority Muslim. But this area where the terror attack happened 2 weeks ago, Kashmir, this remained a flashpoint between the two countries. And if you haven't been there, this used to be a tourist hotspot. I've been there myself, and I can tell you, Major, you know, there are hills and valleys. It's a mountainous region. Bollywood movies were filmed there often. This remained a very contentious area. Both sides have fought multiple wars over the years over Kashmir. Tens of thousands of people have died. So many people have been displaced.
Chanel Call, thank you very much. And just for the benefit of the audience, we are very hopeful to have the Pakistani ambassador to the U.S. on this program, quite possibly as early as tomorrow. Again, Chanel, thanks so very much. President Trump today confirmed he will not move forward with his original pick to be Washington, D.C.'s top prosecutor or U.S. attorney. Next, our reporter panel will weigh in on this and other political news right here on America Decides. Welcome back. This doesn't happen often, so when it does, it's worth digging into. There were Senate Republicans who dissented and basically would not do what President Trump asked, which is to vote to confirm his nominated prosecutor, that is to say U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. His name is Ed Martin. Well, here's what the president had to say when he admitted that sad but difficult truth.
He's a terrific person, and he wasn't getting the support from people that I thought. You know, he's done a very good job. Crime is down 25% in D.C. It is unbelievable, and hopefully we can bring him into, whether it's DOJ or whatever, in some capacity.
Mr. President, you can bring him into whatever non-Senate confirmable capacity you wish. You know that. I don't need to tell you that, but that's probably what's going to happen. Margaret Taleb joins me now. She's a senior contributor for Axios, and also here at the table, Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Notice, remember, Notice News of the U.S. We'll get to Ed Martin in a second. I want your quick take, your hot take, because today is a day for hot takes about the future of the Catholic Church. First American Pope. Go for it, Margaret.
I mean, he's sort of a pope of the world, but he's definitely got a foothold in America and Chicago.
Chicago and Villanova.
Less. Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, his recent and public comments critical of this U.S. administration, of the Trump administration, vis-a-vis immigration, had to be part of the internal vetting process. And
it seems that that is a fairly drawn inference. We don't know, but that seems to be a fairly drawn inference.
If you're the secret team voting for the Pope, you're going to think about what they're bringing to the table.
And you know that history.
Absolutely. It's not only history, it happened like a minute ago. So I think, like,
in the history of the church, it is definitely like 2 seconds ago.
Eye blink ago. So I think, look, I think it's definitely interesting. President Trump's initial comments out of the box were like, how cool, an American Pope. Are there going to be public tangles, or is it going to be a more subtle messaging? I think we'll have to see. But this is certainly not only a surprise selection, but a very interesting selection.
And Daniela, probably safe to assume we will see no more AI-generated Pope images of President Trump.
No, but what I find most interesting, I grew up Catholic. This is an interesting, we were just talking in the backstage about this. This is really interesting. I'm mostly curious to see what J.D. Vance has to say. When we discovered the Pope's Twitter account, the new Pope's Twitter account, he actually tweeted some stories critical of J.D. Vance and the administration on immigration. I'm not entirely sure if J.D. Vance has said anything publicly yet.
Yes.
What did he say?
Put out a social media post, just enthusiastic, great news. wish you good luck in your service.
I'm curious what it's going to be like when he specifically asked.
Yeah, kind
about,
of anodyne, but it was supportive for sure.
When he specifically asked about these criticisms from this American Pope that no one saw coming, critical of the administration.
So, who's Ed Martin, and why does he matter? Margaret Talev.
Well, he has been acting as the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., and he also has defended some of the January 6th defendants and their right to do so and downplay their role, and then spent some time
called January 6th Mardi Gras.
Spent some time in his interim capacity purging that office of prosecutors who prosecuted those defendants. And so now what has happened is at least one Senate Republican sort of took one for the team of all the other Senate Republicans who also did not want him confirmed as the U.S. Attorney. And so President Trump is going to need to, he has pulled that nomination and is going to need to follow up with a new one.
It's been difficult to discern bridges too far in the early days of the Trump administration 2.0, but Daniela, this appears to be one of them.
This appears to be one of them, and also the senator that came out against this nomination, also really interesting. It was Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who is facing a really tough re-election in his home state and has to, in many ways, align with Trump on a lot of issues. And he came out, he sits on the Judiciary Committee. That's the panel in charge of passing this nomination to the full Senate, where, again, there was other senators that were probably going to oppose this, like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. And he said, I just cannot support someone who is, had these comments about January 6th. I've spoken to the administration, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of political blowback he gets for that.
My sense of it is you take this hard stance because you're going to make a deal with the president on something he cares about even more, which is the future of the tax bill. And you have some reporting on the House side about where House Republicans, at least publicly, say they are, in the word that we all say, and someday I promise to explain the history thereof, reconciliation.
Just a couple hours ago, I was on Capitol Hill talking to these members of Congress, specifically the moderates, the ones that want to see, we call them the salty caucus, the SALT caucus, that want to see state and local tax deductions caps raised in blue states. Also, the moderates who won't go back home during to campaign with their voters, with Medicaid cuts on the table. So these are the members, that Speaker Mike Johnson is meeting with consistently this week. We'll probably continue having conversations with them over the weekend to try to get them on board on this package, because as these members say, they're the ones that delivered the majority to Speaker Mike Johnson. He can't afford to lose
And the bottom line is they're not there yet.
They're not there yet, and they really do not want to see massive cuts. But then there's the House Freedom Caucus. They want these massive cuts. How is Speaker Mike Johnson going to do this?
Margaret, you and I are seasoned observers.
Yeah, old.
That is what I will say. Seasoned observers of the reconciliation process. And you and I both know that there is an imperative for the first bill of this kind for a new administration. We don't know how the imperative actually sorts itself out, but ultimately
it has to get done. That's the deal. It has to get done. And so there will be a path. The question is, what will be the details? The devil are in the details. And I think your observation about Senator Tillis is quite astute. When we talk about the difficult re-election campaign he would be facing in 2026, it's partly a difficult re-election campaign because of the general election, because it is a battleground state. It's North Carolina. If there's a backlash to the Trump administration, it's going to fall on Republican incumbents sitting for re-election to office. So, yes, in theory, Tillis could face a really tough Republican primary if President Trump decides he wants to exact revenge or punishment. But if he can be an important partner to Trump on crucial fronts, including taxes and budget issues, and if he has a better chance than random other Republican primary challenger in a general election, that could all become part of the Trump team's calculus.
And Danielle, I always remind everyone watching this show, when speaking of Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, he has this approach that is different than his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy.
Very.
And he goes through an elaborate, sometimes exhausting conversational process. He is sort of endlessly cheerful as he goes through it, doesn't seem fatigued at all. And so far, every time there's been a moment of drama, he's pulled him just across the line.
And
not to say that's what's going to happen this time, but you have to look at that past and say you got to take that into account.
I don't have as much experience as you two at the table. I will say.
Be glad of that, Danielle. Be glad of that.
But I will say I was there.
You have much less scar tissue than the two of us.
Not even with the greats is how I feel. But I was there when then Speaker McCarthy was booted, when we watched 22 days of no speaker, and then suddenly Speaker Mike Johnson appeared, and then he won again in January, and I covered that as well. And we're seeing him, he has a very different way of towing the line around these different factions in the conference, and he is someone who doesn't make promises that he can't keep, that he always says that publicly to reporters every single day. So when there is a lot of optimism within the conference, the mood is, you know, he's talking to us. When you talk to these individual members like I do every single day, he's talking to us. We're optimistic we're going to get somewhere. And as Nicole Malliotakis told me just a couple of hours ago, everyone will get everything, maybe not fully what they want, but something's going to happen where everyone's
They will
happy.
get some of something.
Some of something is a great way to put it.
Exactly. Margaret Talev, Daniela Diaz, thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it. Another lawmaker, member of Congress, heads to El Salvador. Our Nicole Killian spoke with Republican Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna about why she went. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. El Salvador has quickly become a prism through which to view America's immigration debate. But the way Republicans and Democrats look through that prism and see things differs. Republicans and Democrats don't agree on what's going on there. And one of the interesting things we're going to talk about now is for Florida Republican Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna, who recently visited El Salvador and talked to our Nicole Killian, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, what did you learn?
Well, Major, that code delegation is underway, led by Ana Paulina Luna, who is also traveling with Congressman Vicente Gonzalez. They both are co-chairs of the El Salvador caucus here on Capitol Hill. And so this is a bipartisan trip that they are making. Take a listen to what Congresswoman Luna told me about why she's taking this trip now.
We are going down there because El Salvador went from being one of the most violent countries in South America to one of the safest. And they are our friends in an area that is increasingly being dominated by Chinese and the cartels, as well as communist ideologies. And so we want friends in South America.
So the Congresswoman says this visit really will have nothing to do with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, of course, the deported immigrant from El Salvador who was recently sent back. Obviously, there's a big legal battle over this. Instead, she said she was invited at the invitation of El Salvador's President Bukele, and that this is really about strengthening ties between the U.S. and El Salvador.
And Nicole, you also spoke with her about a recent push to consider the challenges of being a new parent on Capitol Hill in terms of proxy voting. What did you learn?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we know the Congresswoman was really at the forefront of this debate, along with Colorado Congresswoman Brittany Peterson, with respect to this issue of proxy voting for new parents, allowing new parents to vote remotely when they are unable after giving birth due to medical complications. And so from that standpoint, obviously, we saw a heated debate in the House where that measure was ultimately blocked. And Congresswoman Luna reached a compromise with the Speaker on a different procedure. But that being said, both Luna and Congresswoman Peterson tell me they are not giving up on this issue of proxy voting, and they are planning to work with each other to advance other family-friendly policies in Congress. Take a listen to both. Both of them told me earlier this month.
If you live here full time, you can use the childcare. If you don't, which why would you ever want to encourage your representative to move to Washington, you actually can't use daycare. That is an incredibly important tool for members that are working parents.
Having gone from having a baby and the whirlwind of this while also traveling back with Sam, you know, I think now once the dust settles, it's coming up with our action plan. It's really building those broad bipartisan coalitions. It's the moms and dads here in Congress coming together to actually solve some of the problems that we face.
So both of them told me that they hope that their bipartisan resolution will be resurrected at some point for a vote, if not in this Congress, perhaps in a future Congress, because they argue that there are more young mothers coming to Congress like them. And so that's why it's important these accommodations are made going forward. Major.
Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, as always. Thank you so much. President Trump says the trade agreement announced today with the United Kingdom, first of many. The markets would say they better be. I'll ask an economics expert next about whether or not there'll be more trade deals and what they might look like right here. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. President Trump today announced a U.S. deal with United Kingdom, trade deal. Said many of his deals are still to be worked out. The details of this one, they're still on the pages being sorted out. But the president said he could announce more deals very soon.
We have many meetings planned today and tomorrow, and every country wants to be making deals.
Bring in Martin Backard, senior editor and chief markets correspondent for The Street. Martin, always great to see you. In golf terminology, this one feels to me like a tap-in, U.S.-UK.
I think that's exactly the way to put it. It wasn't that far from the hole, and I think both sides wanted the ball to go into the cup. So that's why we were able to get this framework. I'm not sure that it's the game-changing agreement that it's being touted, but nonetheless, any incremental improvement in trade negotiations is a positive one. That's why the market seemed to like it today. But you alluded to the fact that there's lots of details to be ironed out, and as a result, there is the possibility that this could collapse as a result of ironing those details out, because they're the thorniest of the bunch. But again, nonetheless, incremental improvement, I think talking is a good thing with respect to these, but this was always the easiest one, and in that respect, I'm not surprised that it came first.
And Martin, just for context, the South Koreans have a trade agreement with the United States. The Canadians and Mexico does as well. Those were approved by Congress, and yet they've been reevaluated by the Trump administration. So it's not as if getting a trade deal creates permanent trade status.
You've hit on the central challenge, really, because ultimately a lot of people from other countries are saying, well, what is the point of negotiating these if they are going to change under the next administration? The best thing about trade agreements is that they should be above partisan politics and more about state-to-state negotiations rather than having a political tone. And at the moment, for better or for worse, they absolutely have this political tone. And it's even more galling, I think, from the U.S. trade perspective, that the USMCA, which was renegotiated by the president himself, is now the precursor for these extra tariffs and the perceived unfairness of the relationship between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So I think you're absolutely correct to highlight that. And that does present the kind of challenges I'm talking about when you are trying to establish these trade negotiations, frameworks, and ultimate deals going forward.
And Martin, as you well know, the markets were for a few days trying to assess how serious talks were between the Trump administration and the Chinese. A couple of weeks ago, the president kept saying they were going on. The Chinese kept denying it. It was sort of cat and mouse. Clearly, there will be talks tomorrow involving very senior administration officials and senior representatives of the Chinese government. How important is that in itself to the larger framework?
I think ultimately part of the reason that the markets were positive today to the degree that they were was because of exactly what you've just described. We're now starting to get détente between Washington and Beijing, and this is the absolute epicenter of the entire trade negotiation world. If we can somehow come to a de-escalation, which seems to be the first step that is hoped for from Washington, then there could ultimately be a pullback on tariffs, and the president has alluded to that, and then over the longer term, hammering out something of a negotiated agreement between these two massive trading partners. It's not only important from the United States perspective in order to ensure that goods continue coming in over the summertime and into the months heading up to the holidays, but it's also important, I think, Major, to make sure that China isn't reaching out to other countries in the world in order to try to cut bilateral trade agreements and therefore sidelining the United States. I know it sounds far-fetched, but nonetheless, it's one of those risks that's in place as a result of this very aggressive strategy, and I think that's exactly what the United States would like to avoid.
Point well taken. Martin Backard, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That does it for today. I will be back with another edition of America Decides. I will be back. That's good to know. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern, the Daily Report is coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.